Pacific Standard Time here in California, and I have an amazing guest on today, Robert Edward Grant. And Robert Edward Grant is a best-selling author. He's a modern-day polymath. He's fluent in multiple languages, I believe 8. He's also the host of Gaia TV Codex, which is a great show, and CEO of Crown Sterling and several other companies. So I just wanted to jump in and start with asking you, Robert, how did you start as a polymath, and what exactly is a polymath?
Well, I think, first of all, I never really thought it was never on my list of things to do is to try to be a polymath. I was just always curious about life, and I love to learn. So I kind of consider myself for a long time a philomath, which means someone who's a lover of learning. I just loved accumulating knowledge, and sometimes it was very practical type stuff, and sometimes it was less practical stuff. It was just sort of like trivia type things. And I lived in 9 different countries during my lifetime, and I felt that the best way to learn the language of those countries was, to actually be there and live it and live their culture, and that helped me learn their culture. And in learning their culture, it actually got me a lot of knowledge and information on a broad array of different topics. And so that's probably where it started for me. I mean, I went to school and I had kind of like a formal education, but I never wanted to kind of pigeonhole myself into one area. So, when it was time to decide where I was going to go to graduate school and what I was going to do, all my friends were choosing like law or becoming a doctor and going to med school or something. And I thought, I don't want to be pigeonholed into either one of those. I enjoy law and I enjoy, biology and healthcare. And I also wanted to be broad across, different areas that had nothing to do with it, like, things like physics and mathematics and invention. And so I kind of always went into areas that were uncomfortable and were new to me because I liked the adaptability that I had to basically accustom myself to and kind of get used to. And that's how I kind of got to such a broad, I guess, experiential base. And, I started thinking as well that there was a real benefit to linking the two sides of the brain. The left side of our brains, if we're right-handed, are largely oriented around, analytical thought and rational perspectives, whereas the right side of our brain, if we're right-handed, tends to be more oriented around creativity, imagination, irrational thought. And, the left side of our brain might say no to things, and the right side of our brain is the one that says yes to things. So, and takes the risk. And so I felt that there was something powerful about merging those two sides of my experience in life. And I then realized as well that geometry had a huge impact on doing that because, it's neither left brain nor right brained as an activity. It's both. It's both art and science. And I think that has been probably one of the biggest keys to gaining an even broader experiential knowledge base by what we call left and right brain hemisynchronization.
That's great. And I really believe that we're all converging, in many ways, but especially with the left and the right brain connection. And I'm glad that you brought up Philomath. I'm still reading your first book, Philomath, and plan on reading Polymath next. But
how do you like it?
I love it. And just to tell you, I also have an MBA, but I also have an accounting degree. So I have an accounting background, and I love math, and especially on the metaphysical side, because it's basically the fabric of our universe, and it is our reality. Everything from binary code to the fractal, golden ratio, everything. And, we see it everywhere. And I think that this knowledge should be mainstream. I wrote a Conscious Kid book that I published recently, and my next one is going to be STEM based on sacred geometry in, a fun way, in a picture book. So our, young kids like our 5-year-old son can learn these kinds of things and these kinds of concepts, because it is life, it's reality, it's everything. And I have a question. Well, it came up in the Polymath book, and it's about the digital root or modular math. And some people might know or might not know it, but some examples are the base 10, base 12, etc. And I like how you pointed out that it's actually base 9, and I think that's really amazing. But I guess more of like the base 10 is more mainstream. Correct me if I'm wrong. And there's a Gaia show called Galactic Messages, and they have a YouTube channel called Cosmic Agency, which I love, but they brought up that the base 10 versus base 12 is a difference, and that in basic calculations, it doesn't make much of a difference, but in things like quantum calculations, base 12 is basically like taking 0.12 or 12 and adding it to a triangle and making a more profound toroidal field, which in quantum reality is just, I guess, better for molding the reality and whatnot. And does any of that make sense? And what's your take on that? The base 12 being the more, I guess, the better of the base 10.
I believe that that both numbering systems are vital and critically important. I believe the base 10 has hidden within it a base 12 language. And that's one of the things that comes out in Polymath. If you get to that section in the book in Polymath, where I talk about the potential for, I theorize 3 missing numbers, where there's a number that should exist at the position of 3.66. There's another one that should exist at 6.33, just based on wave characteristics. And then another number that rounds it out at 9.99999. And those numbers, I called, so 1, 2, 3, and then there's Fio, 4, 5, 6, Sieve, 7, 8, 9, and then Eno, 10. So that actually means that there is a base 12 system hidden within the base 10 system. They hold positions based on the wave characteristics and how they separate out. And I found this based on music. But another way that I found it, which was even more simplistic, was based on, and theorized it, was based on starting with a simple line. So we start with a simple line and say this simple line is going to be a unit value of 1. Okay. So now let's say we take that and turn that into a 2 lines. So you've got like an open angle, right? Or you could call this a digon. It's one of the names for this also. And this becomes a, let's say it's got a 60-degree angle on it. And then the third side becomes implied because you just connect the dots, right, from the 2 sides of those 2 lines, and you have a triangle. Now, once you have a closed polygon, which the first of which would be the triangle, the equilateral triangle, then you would have a circle that could exoscribe around that triangle. Now, what happens is if we take this and continue it on, we could have 3, 4. So then you have 4, and each side would be 1 unit. And then you'd have 5, a pentagon, and each side would be 1 unit. You'll notice that the circle does not actually close around any other numbers except for 3, 6, and 9. So the same circle that we started off with is going to end up with a value that is 3.66 as its circumference. So this exoscribe circle then is holding a position. So you could say that in the numbering system, we're missing kind of the feminine representation of circles and the role that circles play in the numbering system. So then when you have those 2 circles overlapping, they overlap again at the number 6, where now you've got kind of a Merkaba, right, that could then be formed off of that. Or the 2 are, before they merge together, would basically create this circle with the overlapping, non-overlapping sections. The circumference would end up being 6.33. And then you go to 3 circles that would create something like the triquetra, which looks like this, right? Someone sent me this as a gift, and I'm grateful if you're out there listening. And it's funny because the day I got this in the mail, someone sent it to me as a gift. And the day that I got this in the mail was 1 day later was a crop circle that looks like this that showed up. So we've been noticing some strange anomalies right? So it can't just be the stuff that I'm posting or some, other people are posting that's having impact on those crop circles potentially. It's just kind of way too many coincidences. But basically what we found is that those three circles overlap to form 9.999, which holds a position in quantum computing also that would be this X position. So 1, 0, or X in trinary code. X would also be like a Roman numeral 10, and 9.999, when it goes out infinitely, both holds characteristics of 0 because 9 acts like a 0 in digital root math, and the number 1 because it rounds up to 1, right? Or 10. So, and X is the symbol in Roman numerals for 10 as well. So we have 1s, 0s, and X's, and I believe Eno is that number that can be kind of a super number. It actually holds the characteristic where it can either be, just like in quantum computing, the X can either be 1 or 0.
That's really cool. So that little model that you just held up, the little white model with the trifecta, is that a representation of like the 369 that Nikola Tesla refers to?
I believe it is, yeah. I believe it's absolutely related to this. And so if you use this, if you look at this triangle inside here and imagine what I'm talking about is this side is 1, this side is 1, and this other triangle side is 1. What's interesting about it is then you have this closed circle that closes around it perfectly, right? If we go to a square, the square will overlap. So using 1, 1, 1, and we've got the same circle of 3.66 as its circumference, then this square overlaps and forms like a squared circle. And then you end up with 5, and the circle is effectively too large for the enclosure around to perfectly exoscribe a pentagon. And it doesn't happen again until you get to the 6, that it does close around it as well. So this circle thing, I think, is fundamental. And I think it has something to do with, in particle physics, antimatter, which would be considered like a positron, an antiproton, and an antineutron, would also be the number of positions that are missing in those, Theo, Sieve, and Eno in theoretical sort of particle physics perspective. But, this definitely is something I think it relates back to 3, 6, and 9. And, that's why 7 holds such an important position, because 1 over 7 is 0.142857. So those numbers are the numbers that relate to gravity and electromagnetism. So 1, 4, and 7 are gravitational relationships, and 2, 5, and 8 are electromagnetic relationships. So as a result, then you could say, well, what are the 3 things that are left over? Well, the 3 things that are left over are 3, 6, and 9. And then the 3 missing numbers, right, that would fit inside the base 10 system to create and round out a true base 12 within the base 10 is a sideways 3, a sideways 6, and a upside down sideways 9. So those are the positions that are missing, and those are the shapes that we've basically theorized for Theo, Sieve, and Eno, and represent the 3 missing particles as well, which would be dark particles of positron, antiproton, and antineutron.
So it kind of sounds like the base 12 actually complements the base 10, or
it's part of the same thing. It's exactly. It's not like, that's why a lot of people really get focused on saying, no. We need to look just at, base 12 instead of base 10. No, you need to look at both. And nature uses both. And our way of looking at time is based on both. That's why we have the Sumerians, or whoever it was that came up with the base 60 system. They chose base 60 because 60 was the convergence of both the 5 and the 6, which is the same as 10 and 12. It's just half of 10 and 12, right? 5 and 6. So 60 is divisible by both 5 and 6. So that means that it has characteristics of both base 10 and base 12 embedded within it. So, that is a fundamental aspect of the way we need to be looking at the numbering systems, that we should be using both the 5 and the 6. And let me give you another example of why that's important. So if you look at DNA, which is the foundational building block of life, the entire DNA structure is based on 5 and 6. First of all, DNA is dodecahedron stacked on top of each other. And the platonic solid that is the dual of the dodecahedron is the icosahedron, which represents water. You can't have one without the other. So that means that even though we're looking at dodecahedrons that would be stacked on top of each other, that then represents DNA, because if we rotate that, it's going to create this wake around it that's going to give us a double strand of DNA. But as soon as you realize that there's an icosahedron also embedded within that to form something called an icosydodecahedron, and we rotate that, the wake formed around that is going to be a 12-strand DNA. So the icosydodecahedron, if we look at the icosahedron from one perspective, it looks just like a pentagon. From another perspective, it looks like a hexagon. There's your 5 and 6. It's embedded within it. The same thing with, you've got 5 sides of a pentagon, and the dodecahedron is 5, sides for each pentagon multiplied by 12, which is, relative to a base 12 numbering system, and the 5 is relative to the base 10. So this is probably why all nucleotide pairs in geometry are literally pentagons abutting up against hexagons. So it's literally 5, 6, and 6. So adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, which you might remember back in school, those actually form the shapes of molecular bonds that are pentagons next to hexagons. So nature is using both numbering systems. The base 10 system, which is based on the pentagon, and then you get to 10 by just inverting that pentagon, you get 10 sides then, right? You could create 10 points around a circle. And then the hexagon and inverting that within it as well and getting 12 sides. So the 5, 6 is the foundational basis of literally all life that exists. One is not more important than the other. I believe that they're both equally important, and the higher knowledge, because it's easy to get trapped and say, oh, it's all about base 12. We should only be on base 12. No, we shouldn't, because we should look at all of these modular systems, because the most divine of all the modular systems is actually 24. And that's where I would say, again, that's the convergence. So even base 60 is based on 24. So 24 times 2.4 plus 2.4 equals 60. And this is another way of looking at musical notes. So you got 7 days of a week, just like you got 7 white keys on a piano octave. The 8th would be the beginning of the next octave. But then within each, you've got 24 hours in the day. And that becomes quarter tones of another octave, right? It's just breaking it down into what we would call like undertones or overtones within musical scales. And all of it is beautifully combined to create this symphony that we call the one verse, the universe.
That's beautiful. Yes, a symphony of like universal language. And you brought up the Platonic solids, and I was looking at that and seeing that it was linked to, I believe, Plato, but that the Scottish stones or something rather go back further. And then I thought of the periodic table. So if, light and I guess waves, not particles, but waves move the way they do, how can we get a snapshot of the periodic table just freezing, an element and saying H2O is this or whatever element is that? Do you think that the periodic table is more dynamic rather than static, and that maybe that's something that we're going to find out down the road?
I think that what we call the periodic table probably shouldn't be on a table at all. I think what we refer to as the periodic table should really be called the periodic wave of elements. Mm-hmm. And I did some work on this, but the person who probably did the seminal work on this is Walter Russell, who wrote The Universal One and The Secret of Light. If you haven't read these, I highly, highly, highly recommend them. And he posited a 9-octave system. Again, it was interesting because he wasn't positing a base 12 system, right? Not that there aren't, but I think it's a fascinating point, because one of the things that I'll mention again about how nature uses both the base 12 and the base 10 systems for numbering together in concert is that Fibonacci numbers, which you're probably familiar with Fibonacci numbers. Mm-hmm. So 1, and then you have another 1, and you add those two together equals 2, and then 2 plus 1, just add the last two numbers in the series. 2 plus 1 equals 3, and then 3 plus 2 equals 5, and then 8. The next number becomes 13, and 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, 233, 377. It just keeps going on and on and on, right? Well, that creates a ratio of numbers. And by the way, this doesn't only work. A lot of people know that it creates the golden ratio. But what they don't know is that you could start with any number and it creates the golden ratio. So if I started that exact same series, everyone's heard about Fibonacci numbers, but very few people, unless they've read my book, know about Lucas numbers. Very few people still further know about Fibonacci numbers with a P. And you can literally start with any number set. So I could start with 2 and 1. So 2 plus 1 equals 3. And then 3 plus 1 equals 4. And then 4 plus 3 equals 7. So now I've got a new series. 7 plus 4 equals 11. 11 plus 7 equals 18. 11 plus 18 equals 29. These are Lucas numbers that I'm now saying. And guess what that also resolves to? 1.618. So you could pick any numbers as you get further out into that number series, and you can divide the previous number into the next number, and you'll end up with 0.618 is the relationship. I could start with 3. So 3 and 1 equals 4, right? 4 and 1 equals 5. So now my number series goes 4, 5, and then 9. And I keep going out in this number series. And so 9 plus 5 equals 14. So that becomes the next in the series. These are called Fibonacci numbers that I'm giving you now, right? And then 14 plus 9 equals 23. So it's an entirely new series of numbers. And yet that relationship as well, it doesn't matter what number you start with, comes out to the golden ratio, 1.618 and 0.618. Fascinating. Well, what we notice is that in each of these sets, if you reduce them down in base 9 mathematics, so this would be the same as base 10. It's just considering that the number 10 becomes number 1 again, right? It's just like acts like number 1. So this is just basic numerological math, right? You can take any number, 27 becomes 2 plus 7 equals 9. Or 35 is 3 plus 5 equals 8. So the digital sum would be 8. So what's interesting about this is if you look at Fibonacci numbers or any of the Fibonacci or Lucas numbers or any of those numbers that just progress by adding the former two numbers, they will always create a pattern of the same number sets every 24 numbers. And in mod 9 analysis, which is like, again, it's a base 10 system, and it does it in 24. So that's showing us right there. To see this pattern, you have to know base 10 and you have to know base 12. So it uses both because there's an inherent 24ness in the entire number series that's like hidden, not understood, not known, right? And we're starting to now only scratch the surface on what that 24ness relates to. I believe that's the true musical scale. If we had the full definition, right, of the musical scale, at least for this dimension or the one we're going into, where it represents this like isotopic expression. Now we see the same thing with isotopes and with elements on the periodic wave of elements. So the periodic wave of elements, if you actually look at it and you say, okay, how many elements do we know there are in the carbon family? So what are the elements in the carbon family? We know we start with hydrogen, right, which is just before the carbon family. And then you go to helium and then lithium, right? And then lithium's next one is beryllium. And the next is boron, and then carbon, and then nitrogen, and then oxygen, and then fluorine, and then neon, right? Those are the first 10 elements of the periodic wave of elements. And we could go into the next cycle, which would have a peak at silicon, right? It would have a peak at silicon. Well, there are 8 elements in that family. So in between the noble gases, which would be, in that case, both helium and neon, you have 8 elements in between, right? And so then if you look at the silicon octave, for lack of a better term, right? we look at silicon and guess how many elements there are between the noble gases that would be, in that case, it starts with neon. And then I believe it goes to either argon or krypton. I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now. But that's one of those two noble gases. And so what's happening is you got another 8. Well, everything in math is going to be like this sine-cosine relationship. So if there's 8 in the carbon family, in the silicon family or silicon octave versus the carbon octave is 8. So then you would expect the next octave to have 16. And then there would be 16 and 16. And then the next would have 32 and 32, right? Now, interestingly, we don't have 16 in the next one. We have 17 because we have isotopes popping out, right? So, and then we have what's called the lanthanides and the alkanides that show up in the next octaves, but they're generally 32. So when you actually start counting this up, you start saying, okay, if I didn't have isotopes popping out, then I would have 32 and 32. I would have 16 and 16. I would have 8 and 8. So, but then if I continued this down to the smaller, elements like hydrogen, this would imply that the hydrogen octave should have 4 and 4 hydrinos. These would be elements that don't even exist on the periodic table. They exist prior to hydrogen, right? So then if you do that, you're going to say, well, then that means there must be another octave before them that would be another hydrino octave that would have 2 and 2. You follow what I'm saying? And then it would go 1 and 1. So that means we would have 1 and 1. We would have 2 and 2, 4 and 4, 8 and 8, 16 and 16, 32 and 32. And then that would be the periodic element. And then if we add up the natural places where the wave should express isotopes, tells us that we should have 137 total elements. And today we have 118. That means we're missing 19 elements, some of which will be noble gases, right? It's like 3 noble gases are missing and something like 8 isotopes and then 8 hydrinos. So basically we have a much broader periodic wave of elements for this expression. And just like I believe that music now should actually be based on a mod 24 system, just like prime numbers are, just like our time system is, then we should be looking also at the periodic wave of elements as being relational to 137. And I'm not the only one who posited this, by the way. Although Walter Russell never posited 137 elements based on the way I just did with you, someone else who did, which was actually more accepted by mainstream, is Richard Feynman. He believed that if we had a full understanding of the number of elements in the periodic wave of elements, we would have 137, which is foundational because that is the fine structure constant. It's the boundary condition of the separation of light from darkness. So this 137 is also a very important number because 137 and 24 are 2 numbers that have very, very unique properties that no other numbers have, except one other pair. There's only one other pair that has this property. And what is this property? Well, if you look at the number 24 and you take its reciprocal value will give you a decimal 0.04166666. So it rounds to 42. Isn't that also the palindrome of 24? So it's a double mirror. 137 has the same characteristics. So if we take its reciprocal value, it also rounds to, 137 becomes 73. So you've got the same reciprocity going on here with 137 has a reciprocal that's its palindrome, approximately its palindrome, and 24 has its reciprocal that's approximately its palindrome. And the only other number that shares this property is 137 divided by 2.4, which is 57.1. And its reciprocal is 175, which is its palindrome. So these 3 numbers, which, by the way, this is where it gets kind of freaky, the fine structure constant of 137, its reciprocal is 73, or 0.00729735. Again, I'm saying it's approximately its palindrome. Only numbers that do this. Happens to also be called the alpha constant. Well, guess what 57 is? 57.57 is the omega constant in mathematics. It's the only number that satisfies the condition of omega, right, to the power of E, right? So basically, it is Euler times omega to the power of Euler, right, comes out to 1. So it's a condition that gets satisfied only by this number. And so it's called the omega constant. So wait a minute, we've got 3 numbers that are double mirrored numbers, like super numbers, whose palindrome equals their reciprocal value. And 2 of them are called alpha and omega. So then what's the third number set? 24. Well, what's the 24th letter of the alphabet? X. Chi. So now we've got 137 and 73, 57.1 and 175, and 24 and 42, and those represent literally alpha, chi, omega. And when you multiply all 3 of those numbers, so if I take 0.73, right, multiply it by 0.571, and then multiply that by 2.4, guess what it comes out to? I'll show you. So this is like an equation. How weird is this? So
as an accountant, I want to see the answer.
I remember coming up with this and saying, what in the fuck? You got to be kidding me. So 0.73 times 0.571, and then multiply this by 2.4 equals 1.000. So alpha chi omega in multiplication equals 1. Really? It's a lot of coincidence.
Yeah, so that's just mind-blowing, Robert. And the basically missing elements on the periodic table, I think you said 18. That's mind-blowing. And, all of your videos and whatnot, the ones that I've seen, I haven't heard that. And I would love to hear more on that if you have any more information. But I have one.
I believe there are many hydrinos. And again, Walter's not the only one who posited that. Walter Russell was credited. You look up discovery of deuterium in an encyclopedia, it will credit Walter Russell as the person who discovered heavy water. Now, unfortunately, for such a gentle and peaceful man, that led to the creation of the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Deuterium was a vital element that had to be used along with uranium and plutonium to be able to make an atomic bomb. So, these things that we're being able to touch upon here, with every new discovery and every new technology, there will be an equal amount of good and an equal amount of bad that comes along with it. You just have to recognize it's a function of the way the advancement of consciousness goes.
Yeah, that's amazing, and we're learning more, and that's why I love doing these broadcasts to get it out to the masses, and not everybody watches Gaia TV and whatnot, or can afford to buy it. So I like to get the information out, and do want to integrate it in my next children's book. But I have another question about the moon, because I do some stats for a living as an analyst, and I heard years ago, I believe on Ancient Aliens, that the moon is 400 times smaller than the Earth, and it's also 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun, which allows a perfect eclipse, and is unique to just us out of hundreds of moons just in our little solar system. So in stats, I know this has to be slim to none, indicating that the moon is not what we think it is. And do you have any insights on that? Because I believe you brought this up in Codex, and
absolutely.
This just blows my mind as someone that does stats, that it would fit both hurdles, you know, in the distance and in the size, which is, again, slim to none.
Absolutely. So first of all, you're close on this. It's the relationship between the size of the diameter of the sun versus the moon is 400 times difference. The distance must also be 400 times greater between the Earth and the sun, because its diameter of the moon is 400 times smaller than that of the sun's. So the diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles, and the diameter of the sun is 864,000 miles. Now, people always get hung up on this. If you look at the average of the equatorial relationship, that would be, you know, the polar circumference as well as the equatorial circumference, you're going to find it is 864,000 miles. And the same thing with the planets in the solar system. They all have this relationship that are harmonic numbers. Harmonic numbers are numbers that are 3 to the third power times 2 to the n. So 3 to the third power is 27. Multiply that by 2 to the n power, and you're going to get all the harmonic numbers. The harmonic numbers are going to give you those same numbers that are in Pythagorean tuning for the note A. So 432 is 27 times 16, right? So you've got 3 to the third power times 2 to the fourth. And so that's how you end up with these numbers that have these expansions of 432, 216, 108. So the radius of the moon is, and then people would say, but what's that got to do with the mile? Isn't the mile just some sort of arbitrary measurement? And the answer is no. Consciousness made it all. We're in a simulation. One of the boundary conditions of the simulation is we have fixed values of relationships that are based on all of these units of measurement that relate back like a codex into the 5 and the 6. So 528 and 432 fundamentally work together. The Giza Plateau, the length to the width of the Giza Plateau is exactly 528 ratio to 432. Because these represent Ida and Pingala, the two snakes. And by the way, when I put them in precise temperament tuning musically, 432 I'd already done, and then that kind of blew up and took off. And so then people said, well, what about 528? Can you do precise temperament tuning for 528? So I did. And then I noticed that, wait a minute, 528 in precise temperament tuning fits perfectly in the halfway points of all the 432 semitones. So it's just a snake that fits inside another snake. And I was blown away by that, to be honest, because then that's when I realized that they're both just two sides of the same scale in a 24-note quarter tone scale. And I'm really happy to say that it's now been programmed. They're doing videos of it and everything. It's just going to be, I'm excited to see, because tons of people have started doing stuff with precise temperament tuning in 432. There are whole orchestras that are now actually tuning to that. And their conductors have reached out to me. It's really exciting. The music that it creates is really beautiful. And you feel the difference. You really do. I had no idea what it was going to sound like when I posited it and I theorized it. Lots of people have theorized different musical tuning standards. I did this entirely based on geometry. And I posted it, and there was a professor of music in San Francisco named Jason Martineau who wanted to debunk it, I think, who then programmed it and played it, and he was like, whoa, this sounds pretty amazing. So it turned out really good. But you know, it was based on this notion of fixing the major third to a value of 1.26 instead of 1.25. And when you do that, you can use Pythagorean just tuning for all the rest. You don't need a Pythagorean comma anymore. And I did that same thing to 528 hertz. So what we're looking at here is, you know, and it's the same thing with a periodic wave of elements. We're looking at basic mathematics. If you start with the number 6, and you consider that that's a fathom, which is like a father, mother, right? Mother backwards, fathom, right? Then you got 6 feet, which is 72 inches. Well, if we take 6 feet and we subtract from it the Euler number, you get the meter. Wait, what? So a fathom of 6 feet, which is a depth measurement, what we can wrap our arms around. Vitruvian man has his arms outstretched 6 feet as well, same thing. What we can get our arms around is known as a fathom. It's a measure of depth. And when you start realizing, okay, well, if I just take 6 and I subtract 6 feet, and from 6 feet, I subtract the Euler constant, 2.718, I get the meter? Are you kidding me? That seems kind of like amazing, right? And then if I take 5 and I subtract the meter from it, I get the Royal Egyptian cubit. And 6 minus 1 equals 5. So I've now got in the number 6, the cubit, the Royal Egyptian cubit, 1.718, the foot, and the meter. And wait, are these all related to each other? Oh, yes, they are, it turns out. So if I have a circle with a radius of 1 meter, and I swing a pendulum that is 1 meter long from the center of that circle, swing a pendulum, it will take 1 second to traverse exactly 30 degrees of arc. And 30 degrees of arc is pi over 6 of arc. And guess what? With my radius being 1 meter, that 30 degrees of arc is exactly 1 Royal Egyptian cubit. So now we've linked all 3 measurements of time space into one. The foot, the cubit, and the meter, and time as well. The base 60 system. Yeah, because that pendulum will swing 86,400 times in a day. So the sun has 864,000 miles as its diameter. The moon has 2,160 miles as its diameter. The difference between those two is 400 times. The distance from Earth to the moon is 232,000 average miles based on its aphelion and perihelion. And then you compare that with 93.3 million miles for the sun, that's 400 times. This is why we get a perfect eclipse. And that's why when we look in the sky, on average, the moon looks to be the same size as the sun in aspect ratio for us humans that live on the surface. What an amazing coincidence. It seems a little too perfect. The chances for that to happen are about the same as the fact that the Great Pyramid has a latitudinal measure in degrees of 29.9792458 degrees, right? So that becomes its north measure. That's also perfectly the speed of light in meters per second. And the name pyramid means fire in the middle, and synonymous with fire for ages has been the term light. So now you're talking about the mean or the middle of light. And so wait, that's the latitude, and the longitude is 31 degrees, 8 minutes, and 3.1 seconds, which is exactly 1 over pi. Really? And then, by the way, if I take that same 31 degrees, 8 minutes, and 3.1 seconds, and I divide it into 360 degrees, guess what the ratio comes out to? 0.0864. The diameter of the sun again, 864. And if I add 1 to the front of that, 1.864 times 10 to the 5th power is the speed of light. Can't be a coincidence. So wait, on one axis, the Great Pyramid is the speed of light, and on the other axis, it's time, which shows us the relationship to 1 over pi. I would say that the chances of that happening are about the same as the ridiculousness of having the sun and the moon be the same exact perfect aspect ratio in the sky for the viewer. It's all metaphorical. It's there to teach us something, to realize that this universe is mental, not material. And the latest Nobel Prize just awarded basically proved that local realism is false. You cannot separate your experience with the universe with your observation of it. We all bring our conditioning biases. We all bring our judgments into what we're perceiving. We're not actually perceiving what we're perceiving. We're perceiving what we're believing we're perceiving. I did this post on Instagram a few days ago. I showed a picture of Mona Lisa that was in a negative image. So it was like an inverted negative image. And so everywhere that should have been black was white. And so if you stare at this dot on her nose, in the center of her nose, for 15 seconds, and then look at the adjacent white background that is next to it, you'll see an image in your own mind, like a shadow image of the Mona Lisa in its natural color. How does that happen? It's like our brain understands the color wheel and the opposites of the color wheel, just as what I'm looking at when I look at you on the screen, what's actually being processed back to my brain is an upside down image. I'm sure you've seen this before. But my brain is actually right sizing it to look at it so that it's right side up. But by the same token, it also understands how to invert an image across the color spectrum. What we are perceiving is not real. It's based on our sensory perception, which is like an interface that we have in a simulation to be able to perceive through our five senses, which five senses are now going to 5 squared senses. And with our extrasensory perceptions going up to 6 squared in total, 36 senses. That's related to this shift that's happening around the world.
Wow. That's just mind blowing. And I did take your light language class early 2022, and you mentioned a lot of this, and this is where I really got deep into the sacred geometry aspects of the fabric of basically our universe. And I told myself, I wish Robert Edward Grant had a Gaia show. And then a few months later, boom, Codex is, as you were filming that, I guess my wish came true. And I highly recommend Codex. I believe there's one.
We have 2 more seasons coming out. Yeah. 2 more seasons coming out very soon. And our last trip to Egypt and the trip before, we had tons of footage and everything's going to end up in this. And we had some massive discoveries that I haven't even announced yet or talked about because I want to make sure they go out the right way. And I think it will have a huge impact. Now, we're also going to be doing a film debut of this new film that we've basically been working on, which I've been working on with Alan Green, called Giza, the Holy Grail of Geometry. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It shows this mathematical relationship of Metatron's cube to the entire construction of the Giza Plateau. It upends the entire reference point we have on history and who the builders of the pyramids were, and that they were actually built all at the same time. It becomes very obvious when you see, not only does Metatron's cube inform the pyramid complex in this first dimensional view or 2-dimensional view, looking at it as if I'm looking at it as a flat surface where each of the pyramids are actually in perfect proportion one to another and derived entirely from Metatron's cube. But now when we take it to another dimension, so we're now looking from a y-axis perspective, not only x-axis, but looking at it from an aerial viewpoint, looking down on the Giza Plateau, the location of the pyramids and their exact size proportions and everything. We already believe that it's related to Orion's belt, as Robert Bauval and others have surmised. But what we know is why the pyramids are the exact sizes they are. And Metatron's cube defines it perfectly in not only 1 dimension, but 2 dimensions. And then also in the 3rd dimension. We believe that this analysis goes all the way up to higher dimension. And we are releasing this because it's so mind-boggling. It's kind of unequivocal, and it's so perfect, too, that it's unassailable mathematically. And for it all to be a pure coincidence, no way. And what we're looking at on the Giza Plateau is actually music and the Tetractys. The height to the base ratio of Menkaure pyramid is 5/4. So height over 1/2 the base. If you go the full base over the height, that becomes 8/5. And those ratios in mathematics and music define for us something called the major third and the minor sixth. It just depends on how you look at it. And when people listen to this music, when they listen to the major third, they all report, whoa, that sounds beautiful. Da, da. You go to a piano, the first thing you do is go, da, da. Everyone does. And then you go, da, da, da. So we add a perfect fifth in there. Well, guess what? The first da, da is the Menkaure pyramid. And its inverse is just the bass, the full bass to the height, which becomes the minor sixth. And people, when they listen to a major third, they say, oh, it sounds like romantic love. It's beautiful. And the minor sixth is heartbreak. There's deep metaphor in this. And the experience of romantic love is also heartbreak, the seed. This is the duality experience. The music we've been listening to is all based on the square roots of 2. The root of 2 is the essence of duality, the separation. So now we have to modify this to pull back the 1 into it. You add to the 5/4 relationship. One of the sides of Menkaure pyramid is actually 1.26. It's 1/2 base to its height. We look at the Khafre pyramid is 4/3. So we have 5/4. Khafre becomes 4/3, which is the perfect fourth, whose inverse is the perfect fifth. And then the Great Pyramid is 2/pi, which pi is just the circumference of a diameter of circle, that is 1. So it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's the perfect tetractys. Look at Walter Russell's book, and the entire book is based on the simple mathematics of 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, which is a placeholder for 5, and then 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's the pyramid complex. And we're looking at all experience, all of our emotional states even. The sound of the Great Pyramid, this 2/pi relationship, is actually something called the diminished fifth. The diminished fifth is based on the square root of 2, and it's the unfinished man. The man who doesn't understand who he is and doesn't remember his mission or why he's here. But through this knowledge, it's this layering, right? Peeling back these onion layers, understanding and remembering who we are, and awakening through a series of softenings. We learn in this world through difficulties and through challenges. And the series of softenings opens our heart so that we move from being left-brained to being balanced right and left-brained. There's a question here. Will there be a follow-up to Philomath? There already is. It's called Polymath. Polymath is the second book. It was launched in December. It's done really well. It's also on Amazon.
Yeah, I'll be reading that one next after Philomath, which I believe I'm on the Lucas number chapter now. But yeah, I was going to ask you about the Giza Plateau, and you just went right into it beautifully. And with the encoding of Da Vinci's art and the Shakespeare sonnet and Giza Plateau, do you think there's anything that's being hidden from us? Because I noticed that, I'm an investigator, and it was really hard for me to find images or videos on ground penetrating radar, which has been out for some time, or the Muon, scan technology of basically Giza Plateau, underneath. Are there some energy chambers or, ancient, technology or something underground that you suspect? Because I haven't been there yet, but you've been there. Did you feel this, in going there to Giza?
Yes. I think there are a number of things that I think are related to that might be considered to be hidden from us. There's been a lot of work done under the Sphinx. I've actually been under the Sphinx. I've been under it, and I went through what I like to reference as the sphincter. The sphinxter. It's there's like on the backside of this giant cat. Interestingly, by the way, the Sphinx length is exactly half the height of the Great Pyramid. So it's just over 240 feet, which is 73 meters. Wait, what a coincidence. 240, isn't that 24 and then 73? Those two numbers and then embedded within that is already the relationship of 57.1 and 175, kind of coincidental. But yes, I've been inside the sphinxter. It's on the backside of the cat, right by the tail. There's like a crawl space you can go inside there, and then you can stand in there. And as soon as you get in there, you see there's a barricade. There's a barricade. I mean, I could see over the barricade. The Sphinx is hollow. There's no doubt about that. It's not really possible. They don't let anyone in there, but I believe there's a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the Sphinx. And that's not the only place you see it. I think the entire, area in Egypt, in both the upper and lower Nile areas, I think are full of underground complexes. I've seen many of them. I was under the Step Pyramid. I went down as far as anyone's allowed to go. We were over 150 to 200 feet underground, and it still extended, but the scaffolding was not very solid. And so if you fell down that, you ain't coming out. So it's still extended as far as the eye could see. There's entire cities under there. Why did everyone move underground? That's a big, big question. A lot of people think it related to solar flares. It's hard to know. You see buildings in Karnak that adjacent buildings exploded, entirely exploded. And then, other buildings are entirely left untouched, like Dendera. It's incredible. Mm-hmm. And so what was it that could have exploded these buildings and thrown blocks that are, hundreds of tons, many, many feet away from the building? It's really hard to know. This wasn't done by people. And why would you do that? There's no point in it, but they literally look like they exploded. But you don't see like burn marks on them or anything. It's really hard to know what would have caused it. Some people posit that it was something with really powerful solar flares. And it's hard to say. But I think that right now, Egypt, in a way, COVID and what happened with COVID is helping Egypt to open up. The Minister of Antiquities is a friend of mine, is a great fellow by the name of Mustafa Waziri. And he is also, they combined the role of the Minister of Antiquities and the Secretary General of the Council of Antiquities, along with the Minister of Tourism. So now they've combined all of that into one leader, and that one leader is Mustafa. So they have an orientation now that's very much around trying to attract people to Egypt to help their economy. And I think they're opening up more and more. They made this announcement. I happened to be in Egypt the night that they had the big discovery, where they found, got video footage of the corridor that leads to the new chamber that is above the king's chamber. We believe that it's been encrypted by Leonardo da Vinci and that it's at the throat chakra line. There are several lines, right, on the Vitruvian Man. Vitruvian Man, which you can see is like right over my shoulder here. This Vitruvian Man, Da Vinci left horizontal and vertical lines, as you would have seen on Codex. And the exact place of those horizontal and vertical lines cut the shoulders, cut the chest, right, cut the groin, cut the knees, cut the elbows and the wrists. These are the exact places, and there are 14 of these such cuts. And these are the exact places that Osiris was cut in Egyptian legend into 14 parts by his brother. And Da Vinci actually references, I cut my man into 14 parts, and it was 1/14. There's like the one piece that was missing is the penis, right? And that's the 1/14. And so there was a big search, when Isis wanted to put her husband back together again, she had Nephthys searching with her, who was the woman who supposedly had an affair with Osiris that really angered his brother Set, because Set was married to Nephthys, and Nephthys was like super hot. And so I guess Osiris had an affair with her, and his brother got angry, pushed him into a coffin, nailed it shut, and then threw him down the Nile River, and then opened it up and cut him into 14 parts. This is the story of the cycle of life, death, and resurrection, or reincarnation of Osiris. And this doesn't only show up in, the pantheon of Egypt. It shows up over and over and over again across multiple pantheons. I was just studying the Slavic pantheon this past week, which has also the same symbologies, which was strangely close as well to the symbologies of Nordic tradition. And I started looking at the DNA evidence that says where the Nordics and the Vikings came from. And guess what? They came from the Slavs, and the Slavs were close to Greece. So all these pantheons are interrelated. So I think what we're now starting to see is Egypt is starting to open up more and more. And I think the next big thing is going to be the result of the Scan Pyramids project. It's not so easy just because they know that there are hidden chambers. And by the way, there are 22 structures that are unknown inside the Great Pyramid. They know this from the scans, the latest scans. And we know that they match up with the exact lines, the ones that we have evidence of and we've been into, they match up perfectly with the lines of Vitruvian man. So we believe that the lines that we don't have chambers for is where those other chambers are. Right? So that means that there's a throat chakra one. There's one also at the pineal gland. There's one at the crown. So there's 3 more chambers above the king's chamber, we believe. We believe there are 2 that might be referencing the shaft of Osiris at the knees. Right? And so we're analyzing this right now. But I'll say this, that the Egyptian government is now very open to these things. Very open to these things. And Da Vinci had written about his time working for the Sultan of Cairo in a letter that he wrote to the Devattar, Lieutenant Devattar of the Sultan of Cairo in 1486. And this is a letter he left in Codex Atlanticus. And it's in reference 1336 and 1337. It's well known. The art historians don't understand any of the story, and they don't understand the math, and they don't understand cryptography. So they think that it's just a fictional account. Why would he write a draft letter of a fictional account of going to Egypt? It makes no sense. And he even references having lived and worked in a bustling city. It was encrypted, but he was talking about at the base of Mount Taurus. Well, people think that that's somewhere in Armenia and Turkey, but actually Mount Taurus is the other name of the Great Pyramid. Bull Mountain is the other name of the Great Pyramid. And Taurus is Ras Tau. Ras Tau means the Rose Cross. That is the name of Giza. And he said he lived in a town called Calindra, which means calendar. And calendar comes from 2 words, calendar and dragon, Dragos. Calindra is what he called it. Well, guess what? When I was in Egypt on this last trip, I realized that next to the fortress of Babylon, in Cairo, in Old Cairo, there's a small town called Maadi. And Maadi means calendar. And it's exactly where he described it was. So we now have, we believe, very powerful evidence that this is the reference that Da Vinci was using. He was talking about living in calendar, which, by the way, was also where the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, lived for a long time. While, they had to escape when Jesus was born from Herod's extermination order for all firstborn male children. They went to Maadi. They went to this place. And by the way, the Calendra, there's a big chapel right there in Maadi. And that one chapel is the original Coptic chapel of original Christianity. And guess what the name of that chapel is? It is the chapel to St. George of the Dragons, Calindra. So it's all connected. And the Last Supper, even, we believe, has a relationship. All the paintings of Da Vinci after his trip to Egypt, which we believe was from 1483 to 1486, every painting was encrypted with Egypt after this period of time. And even his paintings prior to this, which includes the very famous painting, which is called the Adoration of the Magi. And you'll remember it because it's the one that everyone says is unfinished, because he's got all this framing and everything in there, and there's so much wild stuff going on. So there's an elephant in the background. It's like Mary sitting on this rock with Jesus and the 3 magi, which were, the 3 wise men, giving her frankincense, myrrh, and gold. And then in the background, there's like Roman warriors, Greek warriors, what look like Etruscan warriors. even like priestesses in an Egyptian temple and a big column that looks just like the columns at Esna Temple in Egypt. It's identical, has a lotus flower at the top. And what is this? And then on one side, you've got buildings that look like, away in a manger in Bethlehem. And then on the other side, you got Egyptian buildings. And what's he trying to say? Well, I believe that what he was actually drawing a picture of, because everyone says it's unfinished. I don't think so, because there was another one that was very similar to it that he did right before it, that he encrypted with a lion that was kind of like this caricature version of a lion. And he wrote Leo on the lion, which is, of course, a reference to himself. He hid it and encrypted it in the backside of the lion. Well, what's interesting here is that if you could see through time, how could you picture time where you take one place and then actually reference that same place throughout time? You would have buildings that would be see-through buildings. You would have people that would be see-through people. You might have a scene that's way back in history where it's just elephants and animals and bulls and cows and camels. And then you might also have wars being fought in that same place with men on horseback with swords. You might have elaborate buildings that through time have been taken down and destroyed. And that's exactly what adoration of the Magi is. He's giving us not the reference we normally see as a two-dimensional or possibly perception of three dimensions of a scene. But what he's actually giving us is a five-dimensional or possibly six-dimensional view of time-space. The same location through millennia of time. The comings and goings of experience, where really it's just a simulation, and all of these different backdrops are just different set changes for the simulation.
That's amazing. And your insights on Da Vinci and tying it all together in a bow like that are amazing as well. I wanted to ask one final question, if that's okay, because
Sure.
I don't want to take too much of your time. And I'm going to switch subjects here to Crown Sterling.
Mm-hmm.
And as CEO of Crown Sterling, you're launching a quantum secure messenger.
Yes.
And it's an encrypted secure messenger. Can you please speak about the unique, blockchain and quantum security aspect with the quantum secure messenger? Because I can't wait to jump on that train.
So this has been kind of a, it's interesting. Up until now, I have not felt my role should be to be directly involved in politics. I have shunned it, in fact, and I've been asked by, at times, both parties to get involved. And I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat. But the Republican Party, knowing that they can't really win in California, the way that the population is set up here, the demographic, they asked me to run for U.S. Senate in 2010. And so I decided that, and it was going to be when Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein was going out. And they didn't have a candidate. And I didn't end up doing it because I got involved in campaigns and I saw the corruption of politics. And I just didn't really want to be part of it. And by the way, we have a very dirty government. I'm just being honest. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's time for us to start calling it out for what it is. It's dirty. And it's dirty on both sides. I'm not trying to say Democrats are only dirty and Republicans are only, no, it's all dirty. The whole system we have of representative democracy is now become an anachronism that I believe no longer serves humanity. And it's time for a new construct. And I don't think we need agency and representation in the same ways that we once did. In the days of the founding fathers, which I think their intentions were all right, I mean, they would freak out if, remember, they went to war with England over a less than 2% tax. That was the whole taxation without representation. They would freak out if they saw that the latest Powerball winner in, I think it's New Jersey, who won $1.2 billion, had to pay $800 million in taxes. So really the winner of the lottery was the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a crazy, you're an accountant, sounds like you're a forensic accountant as well. That's kind of a crazy amount of money to be paying in tax. Let's be real. I mean, whenever the government gets more than the actual contributor to society, something's wrong with that picture. And I'm not for generational wealth. I was not part of a generational wealth, and I'm not going to pass on to my children my wealth. They know this already. I would not want to rob them of the opportunity for them to make their own way. They're not going to be starving, but they're not going to get the vast majority of the wealth that I've accumulated because I don't want to rob them of it. I love the fact that I was able to learn, and I had to go through the difficulty and challenge to see what it's like to succeed in this world. I would never want anyone to take it from me. So I don't believe in generational wealth. I think that that's a negative aspect of society, and anyone in right mindset should not burden their children with it. That's what I feel. But having said all of that, I decided not to get involved in politics. That said, I have been very, very increasingly concerned about the encroachments on individual rights and freedoms. And I've been very worried that in today's society, we have intelligent people who are being silenced so that we don't offend people generally. And I don't think society can function without free speech. So if I feel like I have a role in something, it is to help to bring new systems that will outlast me and don't depend on agency and power and someone getting into office who then becomes corrupted because absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so I felt that there needed to be a system for free speech, true free speech. And with boards of companies today, they all get stuck into this modus operandi, which is one of boards believe that their role is not to create value, but to mitigate risk. And as a result, if the US government shows up to Facebook and says, hey, we have a list of dissidents, let's say the FBI, which is corrupt as fuck. I'm sorry. They're like the most corrupt right now.
Yeah.
Let's say the FBI shows up and says, hey, we've got a list of dissidents, and we would like to see all of their messaging. And by the way, you can link this all now with their use of CBDC. We can turn off the money of the dissidents. By the way, China does this already. It's called their social credit system, right? And this becomes super dystopian. So what's to stop the government from coming to Facebook and saying, Facebook, give us all of your information on this dissident without a warrant, without constitutional due process? And Facebook just does it. Facebook actually has a government monitor inside their office that everything funnels through. No joke. Look it up. And even myself, I found out that there are 56 pages of my beliefs politically that exist on the internet. And I've read it, and it's astounding. They know my entire voting record. I don't vote party, I vote candidate.
Yeah, me too.
They know, and by the way, people in the middle are at highest risk. People in the middle are at highest risk. When in society could we ever have said that before? But when society becomes so polarized, you can see that that actually could happen. So the libertarians now, the people in the middle who are neither claiming Republican or Democrat, and by the way, the largest party in the country right now would be independents, because people are so sick and tired of the extreme polarity. And what's happening is exactly this. We're moving from yin yang to yin shen yang. It's the triqueta. It's threefold. And that's the shift of the chi. The alpha omega becomes alpha chi omega. So what I thought was there needs to be a method, there needs to be a system that allows for free speech and dialogue for people to organize. And the only way that you could safeguard a company against this is by putting it all on blockchain. so that there is no centralized server that a government could appear and say, without a warrant, we would like to unilaterally look at so-and-so's messaging without a warrant. Now, I'm not against, I know that crimes happen, and I'm not against people being able to give that. I make my own website too. There are millions of people that have their own websites. They're responsible for what's written on those websites. But if the government shows up to them and they have it on their own server, then they have the choice to either comply with the government's request if there's a warrant, a legal warrant, or not, and they can plead the fifth. There's constitutional protections that happen for that. So when we first started this, the very first Genesis block of our blockchain was this notion of, we believe that data is the intangible personal property of the original producer. And data today is the new oil. It's the most valuable asset in the world. It's being taken from us without anyone's knowledge. And where do you think the 56 pages came from of all of my norms of my political beliefs? They knew down to how I felt about what month is no longer acceptable for a birth to end up getting an abortion. That degree of nuance I've never even talked to people about. But guess how they got it? They got it all from my messaging apps that were supposed to be encrypted. Today, if you're not paying for your social media and your messaging, then you are the product. And that product is way more valuable, way thousands and thousands of times more valuable than a simple subscription fee. The most valuable asset in the future will absolutely be your data. And being able to safeguard yourself from getting replicated. Imagine you go to a voting booth and someone says, oh, you've already voted. We have you down. You already voted. We have video footage of you in another voting location where you voted. That could happen right now. You can get deep faked. And it's already, I believe, a super high risk in society. So what do I believe? I believe that the only way to safeguard this notion of free speech, which is the First Amendment for a reason, is to have a platform that has no ability to be monitored other than, just like my own website. I can have my own confidential site, my website, and I'm responsible for monitoring it. The community leaders on this platform are creating their own communities on Orion. And as they create their own communities, they're responsible for what's written on those websites, what's written on the platform. And all of it is quantum secure, and none of it can be cracked by government. None of it can be cracked by anybody. It's the world's strongest encryption. Right now, if you look at Tucker Carlson, just look him up on YouTube. He wanted to interview Vladimir Putin when the war in Ukraine happened. And the NSA called him up and said, look, we know you want to interview Vladimir Putin. We read your messages on Signal. There was no warrant for this. And as a journalist, he was perfectly free to do that. I mean, Barbara Walters used to do it with Brezhnev. They used to do it with several of the world leaders, from Xi Jinping to other. You don't need the U.S. government to agree, because we have free speech, for a press agent to go and meet with a world leader is their prerogative. And yet today, everything is about squelching dissidents. And I think that's just not something that can be sustained in society. So we built the Orion Messenger, which is also part of a larger Orion OS operating system, that whenever you're on our platform, you are completely insulated from any type of data mining. And that's what's really cool about this. And eventually, you won't even have anything else on your phone. You'll just go with this, because the whole thing is going to be quantum encrypted. Your geolocation, your web browser history, everything gets encrypted on this platform. And then you can safeguard all of your data. And if you want to sell your data, you can. It's up to you. You own it. We don't own it. And we don't even have the ability to get into your account, because the keys are sharded across an entire nodal network. They're chopped up into millions of bits. And the only way you could get in would be to get every single validation node to agree to give you everything they have. And then even then you wouldn't be able to put it back together because you don't have the map of how to put all the pieces of the encrypted messaging back together. This is the same encryption that's used on nuclear codes. And it's the world's first to be doing it in true quantum security. So even quantum computers can't crack it. It's not based on a mathematical algorithm. It's based on information theory. So Orion is something that's going to be coming out. It's in beta right now. I'm super proud of it. It's like this beautiful work of art. I love it. And for me, it's one of those things that I hope will become a legacy. I hope that this platform will be one where free people around the world will be able to work together without boundary condition. And it's for the first time, a very important aspect of this. The largest group chat you can have on Facebook's WhatsApp and on Telegram, which is not even encrypted, by the way. If you just Google is Telegram an encrypted group chat, you will find it has no encryption on group chat at all. At all.
Mm-mm.
And they mine all of your data. They sell it all.
Yeah.
That's their business model. Wake up, guys. That's how I got 56 pages on me, so that now I can be identified as a dissident by whoever's in power. And what the reality is here is that there is no other platform that allows you more than 1,000 people on a group chat that's encrypted. We have no limit on Orion. You can have millions upon millions of people. You can even do a live stream of millions upon millions of people, all of it encrypted with the world's strongest encryption, and it's fast. So I'm really proud of this because this is the first platform that could actually unite, independent of boundary, people of the world. It's a uniting around ideology and belief system, allowing them to organize, to find community amongst themselves. And who knows how powerful this could be. You know, the last two revolution attempts in Iran were because of social media, let's be real. Arab Spring happened because of Facebook. And I think that if there was a way for those things to exist without being able to be monitored by government, you know, it's funny, I just wrote this poem. And you probably saw the Schumann resonance thing that came up a few days ago.
Yeah, I've been seeing that blowing up on Facebook, and I don't quite understand it, honestly.
It's kind of epic, right? It's like, what does this even mean? I mean, I'm not going to try to say, except that it looks strangely geometric, right? All of it looks strangely geometric. But a few weeks ago, I was out of state, and I woke up from a dream, and I immediately wrote this poem. Lightning strikes, broken thunder, earth and child torn asunder. A seething bath while calamity boils, infestation to manifestation lies to and from a nation. Hearts halt when men wage war. A man of old age and blunder, just a sinister wonder of ages no more. New ways of old returning as rushing waters, flooding the undulating valleys of all men's hearts. Mistaken courage and shattered dreams of past paradigm. The ticking clock of stolen moments. A lady of aeons awaits, submerged and so sublime. A world of maladies maladapted, the unsung song, the unkept keeping. A sovereign cure with a sovereign crown when Father Time returns. Now, the day of this Schumann resonance anomaly was on Father's Day, which happened to be this year 6/18, which is the golden ratio, 618. The one number, when you take its reciprocal value, it will have the exact same value, just plus one. You know, and also 1.618 squared is equal to 1 plus the golden number. It's the only number that does this. Every number in that sequence becomes infinite, and it is identical as its reciprocal. That makes it golden, like the golden thread. I think that there's massive change coming, that humanity has gone through three different major changes. You know, when in the last few hundred years. The founding fathers changed the world paradigm, and not just in the United States, but in many countries in the world. France also had their revolution at the same time. But in many countries around the world, you saw this transition from sovereign monarch in the late 18th century, from sovereign monarch to sovereign republic. So this is when republics were formed, and this was, representation in our government style, which was having a flavor of democracy, but make no mistake, it was never a democracy, it was a republic. We're not a democracy right now. And the next transition was sovereign government or sovereign republic transitioning to sovereign corporation. And this happened in post-World War II. We are now in the stage of sovereign corporation. Now, the next transition will either go from sovereign corporation to sovereign technocracies. Technocracies, big tech. Or it will go to sovereign individual. You will find that governments are going to start competing with tech companies because tech companies are getting that powerful. But actually, the place that it really needs to go, that sovereignty really truly needs to go, in my opinion, to free individuals. That it's time for humanity to break the shackles of being controlled or overpowered by any force, anyone else. I never would have thought I would say this, but I am going to get involved in this cycle. I believe strongly that there is hope in a new paradigm. And I hope that this platform that we have built, which is fully up and running and operational and is outstanding, is, and you can think of it like a replacement for Telegram, except it's fully encrypted. You can think of it as a replacement for Slack even, or a replacement for Signal or WhatsApp, but it's all fully encrypted with the strongest encryption in the world. I'm super proud of it. And I hope that it has a big impact on humanity and that people will be able to use it to be able to organize themselves. Now, there also is an AI in it. I will say this, it's never monitored, certainly not by us. There's never a monitoring capacity in it at all. But what it does have is it has an AI that blocks people from being able to post explicit content like, child pornography, etc. So it will not allow you to make the post in the first place, right? But there's no monitoring and there's no giving it back to anybody or reporting it to anyone. It just doesn't allow you to post that kind of explicit content. We hope that the free people of the world will be able to benefit from this and organize themselves against tyranny. Freedom, paradoxically, is not free. My father told me that once. He said, son, nothing is free, not even freedom. It's something that we have to hold close to our hearts, because once it's gone, believe me, it's gone. And there has been a narrative that's gone throughout this world around, the benefits of communism. And actually, I've never seen communism actually exist. And somehow in universities now, people are teaching everybody, oh, communism's the right answer. It's just never had a chance to succeed. No, it's never existed because it doesn't exist. Communism doesn't exist. What exists is fascism wearing a mask of communism. Every single communist regime that has been touted as a communist regime and still touts itself as a communist regime is actually a fascist dictatorship. Give me one example that's not the case. So we are now in a period of time, I feel like we have to have these kinds of system-wide changes for our youth, for our children. It's not for me. I've already lived my life. I've had a great life. I don't have any complaints. It's more for children. And the world needs to toughen up, damn it. I'm so tired of everybody being so offended about freaking everything. Get over yourself. It's kind of ridiculous. The world needs to learn some resiliency too. It's time to stop coddling everybody. Maybe it's been all these participation trophies. I have no idea, but I don't think it's helped society.
Yeah, I totally agree, Robert. And my screen froze up, so I don't know if you can see me, or hopefully you can hear me.
I can see you. Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, I can't see myself, but I can see you. I totally agree. I'm the same way as far as the independent thing. I'm like, when people ask me, I'm like nonpartisan everything, religion, politics, all that. I'm really big on free speech. I'm also a military veteran, so that's very important to me.
I was an Air Force brat. My father was in the Air Force, and I did not grow up rich. We were poor. A lot of people say, oh, that's another thing that's been taught to everybody. It's like, you're a victim. I'm so tired of it. Anyone who tells you you're a victim is making you a victim.
Yeah.
Because victimism mentality, the only limitations in life that are real are the ones that you absolutely believe in. If you believe you're a victim, you will always be a victim. You're a hammer searching for the nail of victimhood.
Correct. And, the victim mentality should not be touted to our youth right now. And that's why I like to put things out like, the sacred geometry and how we can basically not just change the world, but create a new one.
And the way to change it, start by changing your perception of what's happening. Start by changing your perception. I had a podcast today with Richard Rudd, the author of Gene Keys. And he taught me something so profound that I just loved. And he said, suffering is grace. He said, we learn through a series of sufferings that then transmute into great learnings. And we enter into, after we've learned to explore the notion of suffering by learning through opposites. If we're here to learn unconditional love, we'll keep experiencing conditional love over and over and over again till we stop judging it negatively. And then we no longer have to learn more, because the embodiment of learning what unconditional love is means you no longer judge its opposite. It's a beautiful thing. But he said something to me that was so profound today, because he said, we're now entering into the exploration where some people are going to start exploring bliss because they've transcended duality. And I'm excited about this transition. I'm like, well, this sounds a lot more fun than the other one. Bliss definitely sounds a lot more fun. But the truth is, the way we change our reality is by transmuting those experiences that we perceive as lead and dense and negative into gold that they actually can be. Realizing that those things are happening for us, not to us. That we're not victims, that we are empowered, that we chose it all. And that through these experiences, we can ascend. It's a beautiful world. I watched this film last night. I couldn't sleep. I watched this film on this woman who had a stroke and had a near-death experience. And it was an amazing experience to read. And I read about her before I saw the film, and then I also watched this film. And I have to say, her experience was very consistent with so many other people that I've known personally that have had similar experiences through death, where she actually died and she went to this place where everything was about love. She got to choose to come back, but she experienced there that there are no mistakes here. That's what she said. There's no mistakes. And that everything was planned, perfectly planned, predestined. Everything that she was meant to learn, everything she was meant to experience was predestined. And I find something very beautiful in this and something very comforting in it too. But thank you so much for taking the time with me today. It's time to live blissfully, and it's definitely time for us to start loving ourselves and everyone else around us. But the only way we're going to be able to do that successfully is by allowing our sovereignty to rise, having mechanisms where we have systems where we can thrive as humanity and organize without overseers. I don't think we need the overseers anymore.
No, we don't. And just to sum up, Robert, do you have an estimated date of release on your Orion Secure Messenger and your seasons 2 and 3 of Codex on Gaia TV?
So seasons 2 and 3 will probably be released sometime in 24. and which is probably pretty fitting because 24 is one of my favorite numbers. And then as far as I have a new book called Neuromind, M-I-N-E-D. It's already available right now on Amazon for pre-purchase. It's already in the top 100 books in tech or whatever, which is great to see in pre-purchase. And that's getting launched on August 1st. It'll be in all the airports at the Hudson stores, right? But you can buy it on Amazon also. And I wrote it with Michael Ashley. And it's about everything we've just been talking about and the importance of safeguarding your data, because it's who you are. It's an extension of who you are. And then the app, which is actually an operating system, Orion, is going to be opening up in expanded beta through a series of expanded betas, the first of which has already happened. We're expanding to the next level in late July and again in August. And, we'll have thousands upon thousands of people on it, likely in September. And then it will have its full commercial launch in October.
Great.
So if you follow me on Telegram, you'll be invited to participate in it in beta. It's already been in beta for 9 months now. So, we've added features to it and everything. And I'm very excited about it because I think you'll love the UI UX. It's excellent. It's very fast. And, you'll be able to participate if you're on my Telegram chat, or if you're, one of my followers in my Facebook group. You'll be the first people to get access to this.
That's great. It sounds amazing. I can't wait to read your other books. Since I'm still on your first book, I'm going to go through all of them. And I am very excited about Orion Secure Messenger, that, I can feel safer and not basically be technically raped with the technocracy of, taking all my information, because you are right about Facebook Messenger, because certain Rumble videos would actually get flagged when I send them to friends in Facebook Messenger, which means that, they're monitoring it, which is bothersome. So I really look forward to those developments. And thank you for spending so much time with me today, and everyone here. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be with you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon, too.
Great. Take care, Robert.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.